Welcome to Bad at Goodbyes. Each week on our show, we spotlight species from the IUCN Critically Endangered Red List. These are plants and animals with decreasing populations, nearing the edges of extinction. So we'll share species research, information, and conservation proposals. And then we'll spend part of the show opening a space for contemplation and awe. We'll perform a soundscape of gentleness, reflection, and perhaps grieving. There's a very low likelihood that any of these species will survive the 21st century, and so perhaps we might acknowledge their passage with a moment of our attention, a recognition of our kinship, and with a commitment to personal and systemic change. Thank you for listening. On today's show, we consider the Catalina Mahogany. The Catalina Mahogany is a critically endangered, woody flowering plant native to Santa Catalina Island near the western North American coast off Southern California, United States. The Catalina Mahogany, sometimes also called the Santa Catalina Island mountain mahogany, typically grows to a height between 20 and 30 feet. Its trunk is slender and forking, usually less than 1 foot in diameter, and covered in a smooth, gray, reddish-brownish bark, like mahogany-colored. But it should be noted that the Catalina mahogany is not, in fact, a mahogany at all. It's actually in the rose family. Its branches are spreading and often form a dense, rounded crown of evergreen leaves. The leaves are oval-shaped with serrated edges and have a leathery texture. They are a dark green color on the upper surface, and their underside is covered in dense, woolly hairs, giving them a whitish or grayish appearance. The flowers of the Catalina mahogany are small and totally lack petals. The creamy white flowers have numerous stamen, that's the male reproductive organ, with prominent yellow anthers. Anthers are the pollen-producing bits at the tip of the stamen. And so this gives the flower an appearance of a bit like a tangled poof. They're cool looking and strange and quite beautiful. The flowers present in clusters and typically bloom between March and May, though the plant does not flower every year. Catalina mahogany are wind pollinated. The lack of flower petals is an adaptation thought to aid in wind dispersal. Petals might block the wind. Following successful pollination, the flowers develop into small, dry, greenish-brown fruits, each holding a single seed with what's called a persistent style. The style is the elongated part of the female reproductive organ, the pistil. And so in the Catalina Mahogany, the style remains attached to the fruit. It's persistent. So then it's this like roughly 3-inch feathery tail that also aids in wind dispersal. The Catalina Mahogany is slow growing. And it takes several years for new seedlings to reach reproductive maturity. And the plant can live for decades. Some estimates suggest even up to 100 years. The Catalina Mahogany is native to Santa Catalina Island. This is part of the Channel Islands archipelago, roughly 25 miles off the coast of Southern California. This is about 50 miles south of Los Angeles. The island is only roughly 75 square miles in total, with nearly 90% of its land protected for conservation. The current population of the Catalina Mahogany in the wild is a small group within a single dry arroyo called Wild Boar Gully. An arroyo is a steep-sided canyon formed by the historic action of fast-flowing water that, like nowadays, is generally dry, but might temporarily fill after ample rain. So the Catalina Mahogany's habitat here in Wild Boar Gully is steep and rocky. Slopes are strewn with boulders and outcrops and covered in coastal sage scrub, and the soil is thin and nutrient poor. Santa Catalina has hot, dry summers and mild winters. Summer temperatures will crest into the 90s. Winter temps rarely reach freezing. Rainfall is spare, averaging around 12 inches per year, with most of it falling between November and April. And though this climate sounds challenging, Santa Catalina hosts a richness of life. It is a special place with a really specific evolutionary history. And so this following list is all species native solely to the island. And so the Catalina Mahogany shares its island home with Catalina Island shrew, Catalina Island manzanita, Catalina Hutton vireo, Catalina Island fox, Catalina Island harvest mouse, Catalina Island buckwheat, Catalina walking stick, Jerusalem cricket, Santa Catalina Island popcorn flower, Catalina Island dudleya, Bewick's wren, Santa Catalina Island ironwood, Trask's yerba santa, Catalina orange tip butterfly, Catalina mountain snail, Santa Catalina Island bedstraw, Catalina Island deer mouse, darkling beetle, Catalina California quail, Santa Catalina Island bushmallow, Catalina two-striped garter snake, Catalina ground squirrel, and many, many more. In the dream, I am dressed like a widow. In the dream, like a Victorian widow. All in black, my face covered. And in the dream, and sometimes too in waking life, this feels right. To hold grief present, but internal, close, and intimate. But this next part feels right too. To unveil, to unmask, to open the living face to the world, to broadcast the keening, the furious mourning, to shamelessly present our rage and sadnesses, to speak them as elegy and incantation. This, in the dream, and perhaps too in life, is a beginning. It is in the naming of loss that we may start to imagine repair. In the dream. The primary historic threat to the Catalina Mahogany was from non-native human-introduced grazing mammals like goats, pig, and mule deer brought to the island. But today, substantive conservation activity has led to the complete removal of the feral goat and pig populations from the island. And the Catalina Mahogany's remaining grove is protected from the mule deer by fencing. And so today, the plant's primary threats are reproductive. Low seed viability, very low seedling success, and the risk of genetic swamping. So, decades of overgrazing have resulted in a population that is not only small, it is also old. And so, researchers have found that though the plant is still pollinating, fruiting, and producing seeds, many of those seeds are not viable. Relatedly, many of the seeds that do germinate and grow into young seedlings and saplings are not reaching reproductive maturity. We are not sure why this is the case, though it may be related to genetic swamping. So let's unpack genetic swamping. Two closely related plants can pollinate each other, mixing their DNA in the produced seeds. So often this results in not viable seeds when the two species' DNA does not combine successfully. Sometimes though, it works, and the result is a hybrid. Loganberry, grapefruit, sweet corn. Hybrids are a totally normal part of the evolutionary process. And over time, with continued successful crossbreeding, can even become distinct enough to be considered their own new species. In the wild, Under like quote unquote normal circumstances, we see mostly like regular reproduction, intra-species reproduction, with only like very occasional hybridization. But with the Catalina Mahogany, the opposite of that is the case. We're seeing genetic swamping. And so the small grove of Catalina Mahogany is surrounded by many, many birch leaf mountain mahogany plants. So many of this other species that during flowering season, the Catalina Mahogany is being overwhelmed by the pollen of the birch leaf mahogany. This is preventing the Catalina Mahogany from reproducing within its own species and resulting in these relatively low success hybrid seed and seedlings. Conservationists have recently taken the extensive step of moving many of the birch leaf mahogany away from the Catalina Mahogany in hopes of relieving some of this pollen pressure. Though it is not yet clear whether that's worked. Scientists have found that conventional conservation strategies, like artificial fertilization, transplanting wild seedlings into protective greenhouses, or cloning the plant by taking cuttings, have had limited success. So they're working on a really innovative way to help conserve and eventually reintroduce the Catalina Mahogany, called micropropagation, or plant tissue culturing. Kevin Allison, the rare plant ecologist at the Catalina Island Conservancy, is leading and refining this process. So he takes very, very, very small cuttings of the wild plant, sterilizes them, places them in test tubes in like an idealized gel mix of all the plant's nutrients, food, hormones, like all the things the plant will need for healthy growth. And of course, like in the test tube, in the lab, the new clone is totally protected from stressors like weather, bacteria, insects, and grazers. And so the result is like a small, safe, like pure living specimen that can then itself be cut and repropagated. And so this is one of the big advantages of this process. Many new clones that we are confident are viable can be produced from a very small initial cutting, which obviously minimizes harm to the living original wild plants. Allison's plan is to reintroduce these clones to a different part of the island, far from the birch leaf mahogany, so that the Catalina Mahogany might begin to reproduce normally again. These micropropagated offspring are also a kind of safeguard, an archive of genetic material. Conventional seed banking is one familiar way that we do this, though time affects seed viability, making for a potentially imperfect archive. So Allison's micropropagation presents the possibility of safe cryogenic freezing of the specimen, which is a potentially like more stable genetic repository. This is cool, really pioneering stuff. This is happening in only a few places right now, one of which is the San Diego Zoo, which is developing what it calls a quote-unquote frozen zoo. This is a kind of cold storage of living genetic material. In the case of the Catalina Mahogany, Allison's next step on the island are in process, a kind of preparation for their return to the wild, called hardening off, a kind of acclimatizing. So the micro-propagated seedlings are slowly weaned from their nutrient gel and then transplanted into a greenhouse, and then over time moved to an outdoor protected growing yard, and then eventually planted in an appropriate habitat on the island, a site with less human cost stressors. The hope is they will begin to reproduce in the wild again. The Catalina Mahogany has been considered critically endangered on the IUCN Red List since 1998, and their population is currently in decline. Recent counts estimate there are less than 8 Catalina Mahogany left in the wild. Information for today's show about the Catalina Mahogany was compiled from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, California Native Plants Society, Catalina Island Conservancy, the Center for Plant Conservation, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the IUCN, the Catalina Islander, New Phytologist, Volume 68, and from Wikipedia. If you'd like to learn more about conserving and protecting the Catalina Mahogany, visit the Catalina Island Conservancy at catalinaconservancy.org. And so now I would like to perform some music in hopes of opening a space to be in contemplation of the other lives with whom we share our earth. I don't want to extract meaning from the Catalina Mahogany. Instead, I want this music to be an expression of my awe and a moment in which I can pause and consider my own relationship to other life. And in particular, of course, as some of that life nears extinction. And so I will sit in this space of sound and awe and contemplation, and I warmly hope that you will join me. I honor the life force of the Catalina Mahogany. I commit to carrying its human name in my record. And I am so grateful to have shared time on our planet with this being. I lament the ways in which I and my species have harmed and diminished this species. I grieve. And so in the name of the Catalina Mahogany, I pledge to reduce my consumption, my carbon footprint, and my wastefulness. I pledge to acknowledge and attempt to address the costs of my actions and inactions. And I pledge to resist the harm of plant, animal kin, or their habitat by individuals, corporations, and governments. I pledge my song to the witness and memory of all life, to a broad celebration of biodiversity, and to the total liberation of all beings. This has been Bada Goodbyes. Thank you for listening. Until next time, let's take care of each other and all of our kin.